The night was supposed to be unremarkable, like so many others. I'd just come back from an exhausting day at the library, where I'd spent hours wrestling with mock exams and caffeine-induced jitters. The house was quiet, steeped in the kind of stillness that seeps into your bones. I liked it that way, no distractions, no forced conversations. Just my room, my bed, and the sweet promise of sleep. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I tossed my bag into the corner and collapsed onto the mattress, still in my clothes. My body begged for rest, and within moments, I was sinking into unconsciousness. But then it came, a faint touch on my hand, light as a feather but startling enough to drag me back to the surface of awareness. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My eyes refused to open fully, glued shut by exhaustion, but the sensation persisted. There was something cold against my skin, a chill that didn't belong in the warmth of my room. When I finally forced my eyes open, the darkness was impenetrable, broken only by the faint outline of a figure near the bed. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Maria!" I croaked, my voice rasping in the stillness. She didn't respond, but the figure shifted closer. Panic replaced my grogginess in an instant. I sat up, fumbling for the lamp on my bedside table, but before I could switch it on, her voice cut through the dark. "Sure, John. Don't wake your father." The words were soft, almost pleading, but they landed like stones in my chest. Maria, my stepmother, the woman my father had married barely 3 years ago, was standing in my room in the dead of night. And her hand was on mine. "Maria, what the hell are you doing?" I managed, my voice sharper now, fueled by confusion and a growing sense of dread. She hesitated, her hand pulling back as if burned. I thought you might be cold. You left your window open." Her excuse was paper-thin. My window was shut, and we both knew it. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm. I wanted to believe her words, to let her retreat and pretend this was nothing more than a bizarre misunderstanding. But I couldn't shake the unease coiling in my gut. Maria lingered for a moment longer, her silhouette rigid and unmoving, before she finally stepped back. "Good night, John," she murmured, her voice almost trembling as she disappeared into the hall. I sat there for a long time after she left, my mind racing in circles. Had I imagined it? Misunderstood her intentions? But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the weight of her presence in my room, uninvited and unsettling, hung heavy in my mind. Sleep didn't come easily after that. When I finally drifted off, it was restless and fractured, haunted by shadows and half-formed memories. The morning brought little relief. Over breakfast, Maria acted as if nothing had happened, chatting with my father about bills and groceries like any other day. She didn't meet my eyes, though, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her words were forced, her laughter too bright. I barely touched my food, my appetite soured by the tension knotting my stomach. My father noticed, of course, but he chalked it up to exam stress. "You've been burning the candle at both ends, kid," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Take it easy today." I nodded, forcing a smile, but my thoughts were miles away. I had questions I couldn't ask, suspicions I couldn't voice. And above all, I had the sinking feeling that last night was just the beginning. The tension in the house didn't subside. If anything, it grew thicker, clinging to the air like smoke. Maria kept her distance, always polite but too eager to disappear the moment we were left alone. My father was oblivious, his usual cheerful self, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I tried to bury myself in studying, focusing on the equations and essay prompts that had consumed my life for weeks. But my mind refused to cooperate. Maria's presence in my room, her voice, her touch, played on a loop in my head, demanding answers I wasn't sure I wanted. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed clarity, an explanation, even if it meant confronting the discomfort head-on. So, when my father announced he'd be working late, I knew it was time. Maria was in the kitchen when I approached, wiping down the counter with the kind of meticulous focus that felt more like avoidance than routine. She didn't look up as I entered, but I saw her shoulders tense. "Maria," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. She froze for a moment, then straightened and turned to face me. Her smile was thin, forced. "Yes, John." We need to talk, I said. The words were heavy, hanging between us like a dare. Her eyes flickered, searching my face for a hint of where this was going. She nodded slowly, setting the dishcloth aside. All right. What's on your mind? I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. But there was no turning back now. What happened the other night? When you came into my room? Her face paled. For a fleeting second, I thought she might deny it, dismiss it as a misunderstanding or a figment of my imagination. But instead, she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the question had knocked the air out of her. I was lonely, she said quietly. I wasn't thinking clearly. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. Lonely? I repeated, incredulous. What does that even mean, Maria? You don't just. I stopped myself, the words catching in my throat. She didn't meet my eyes. Your father and I, things haven't been the same. He's been distant, preoccupied. And, he's struggling with some health issues. Her voice wavered, tinged with frustration and sadness. I feel like I don't exist to him anymore. I stared at her, the flood of emotions crashing over me too fast to process anger, confusion, pity. So what? You thought I could fix that? By invading my space? Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt guilty for the harshness in my voice. I wasn't thinking, John. I know it was wrong. I didn't know what else to do. Her words hung in the air, a confession and an apology rolled into one. But they didn't make the weight on my chest any lighter. I shook my head, stepping back as if distance could shield me from the mess unfolding before me. Maria, this isn't something you can just explain away. What you did, it wasn't okay. It's not something I can just forget about. Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. I think I need to leave, I said finally, the decision spilling out before I could second-guess it. Her head snapped up. Leave. John, please, you don't have to do that. I swear, it won't happen again. No, I cut her off, my voice firmer now. It's not about whether it happens again. It's about what already happened. I can't stay here, Maria. Not like this. Her face crumbled, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew there was nothing she could say to change my mind. I'll pack my things tonight, I said, turning toward the door. Tell Dad. Tell him whatever you want. John, wait. Her voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned back, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Please, don't tell him. About any of this. It would destroy him. I hesitated, her plea striking a chord I didn't want to acknowledge. She was right. My father adored her, and this would shatter him. It was late that evening when I began packing my things. The room felt smaller with each item I shoved into my bag, books, clothes, random mementos from years past, all of them weighed down by an invisible burden. I tried not to think too much about Maria's pleading eyes or the guilt that had begun to settle in my stomach. My heart was torn. Part of me wanted to escape the discomfort, the looming uncertainty of the situation. But another part of me, one that had been buried under layers of confusion and anger, felt the sting of betrayal. I didn't want to see my father like this. I didn't want to be the one to break him. But as I zipped my bag closed, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't share the same space with the person who had violated that trust, regardless of the reasons behind it. I slipped out of the house quietly, just after midnight, when Maria and my father were asleep. I left a note on the kitchen counter, one that didn't explain everything but simply stated I was staying with a friend for a while, that I needed space to think. It wasn't much, but it was all I could give them. I wasn't ready to confront the full weight of what had happened, not yet. Maybe never. The next few days were a blur. I stayed at my friend Alex's place, far from the house I had once called home. It was easier to be away, to not have to look Maria in the eye, to not wonder what my father was thinking. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. What could I have done differently? How could I have handled it better? Was I wrong to leave? But there were no answers. Only the silence, thick with the unspoken truth. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to talk to Maria again. I called her one afternoon, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number I had once called so many times without hesitation. John. Her voice was softer than I remembered, hesitant. Yeah. I paused, my throat tight. Can we talk? There was a long silence on the other end before she spoke again. I understand if you don't want to. But I'd really like the chance to explain, if you're ready. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I agreed. We met at a small cafe not far from her house, a neutral space where I could still maintain some distance. She looked different. There was a heaviness to her posture, a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The woman who had once been so full of life seemed diminished, drained by everything that had happened. John, she began, her voice faltering, I owe you more than just an apology. I know what I did was wrong. But you have to understand. I didn't know where else to turn. I folded my arms across my chest, trying to maintain my composure. You could have talked to Dad. You could have gone to therapy, or just trusted me to help. But you didn't. You crossed a line. Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them quickly, as if trying to prevent them from falling. I know. I just felt so invisible. And when he didn't want me, when he couldn't even touch me because of his health issues, I felt like I didn't matter. I thought maybe if I could connect with someone, feel seen again, it would make everything feel better. But I was wrong, John. So wrong. I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a reason. I could see the vulnerability in her, the pain that wasn't just caused by her actions but by everything that led to them. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. But I understand. I know you weren't doing it to hurt me, but it still did. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face now, no longer hidden. I understand. And I won't ask you to forgive me. But I needed you to know the truth. I exhaled, the air in my lungs suddenly feeling thick. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't sure if I could ever return to the family I once knew. But at least now, there was clarity, however painful. I need time, I said, standing up. Time to think. I don't know what comes next. Maria nodded again, this time in understanding. Take all the time you need. I won't bother you. But I hope someday you can see that I'm sorry, truly sorry for everything. I left the cafe with a heavy heart, unsure of what the future held. What I did know was that the road ahead would be long and complicated. The past couldn't be undone, and neither could the damage. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for all of us. The hardest part, I realized, was not the confrontation. It wasn't even the distance between us. It was knowing that some things are never fully repaired, no matter how much time passes.